A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Sound of rhythmic manual Morse code tapping. It starts clear, then slowly begins to dissolve into static and high-pitched electronic interference. The static swells, then cuts to silence. That sound you just heard, that rhythmic tapping, was the heartbeat of 20th century espionage. But in January of 1965, in an apartment in the heart of Damascus, that heartbeat stopped.
It didn't just stop, Corn, it was surgically silenced. Welcome back to my Weird Prompts. I am Herman Poppleberry, and today we are dissecting one of the most enduring myths in the world of intelligence, the myth of the perfect spy.
We are sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem, and it is March 6th, 2026. It is a beautiful morning, but the topic today is heavy. We are looking at Eli Cohen. To some, he is the greatest spy who ever lived. To others, he is a cautionary tale about the limits of human endurance against the cold, hard laws of physics.
Our production team really stepped up for this one. Usually, Daniel handles the research, but the prompt today was so specific about the intersection of tradecraft and signals intelligence that I spent all night digging into the Soviet archives on radio direction finding. The question on the table is simple but profound. Was Eli Cohen careless, or was his capture an inevitable mathematical certainty?
It is a fascinating pivot because we have spent so much time lately talking about the future, especially with all the seismic shifts we have seen in early 2026. But today, we are looking backward to understand the present. For anyone who needs the quick refresher, Eli Cohen was an Egyptian-born Israeli spy who operated in Syria from 1961 to 1965 under the alias Kamal Amin Tahabet. He didn't just infiltrate the Syrian government, he became a part of its DNA. He was so well regarded that he was reportedly being considered for the position of Deputy Minister of Defense.
Think about that for a second. An Israeli operative sitting in the inner sanctum of a hostile nation's defense ministry. The intelligence he gathered, the positions of the Syrian bunkers on the Golan Heights, the hidden gun emplacements, the troop rotations. It was instrumental for Israel during the Six-Day War in 1967. But the tragedy, and the mystery we are digging into today, is his capture in January of 1965.
The prompt asks if it was a failure of tradecraft, or if it was simply the victory of physics over secrecy. It also asks how this would play out today, in our world of 2026, where the signals environment is infinitely more crowded, but also infinitely more scrutinized.
I think people often want to find a human error because it makes us feel like we could avoid the same fate if we were just smarter or more disciplined. If Cohen was careless, then we can be careful. But when you look at the technical reality of what he was facing in Damascus, it starts to look less like a mistake and more like a trap that was slowly closing from the moment he arrived.
Herman, set the stage for us. To understand the capture, we have to understand the tools. What was the state of the art for radio direction finding, or RDF, in 1965?
It is important to understand that Cohen was using high-frequency radio, or HF, to transmit Morse code back to Tel Aviv. Now, HF is great because it can travel long distances by bouncing off the ionosphere, what we call skywave propagation. You can talk to someone thousands of miles away with relatively low power. But HF has a massive drawback. Every time you press that key, you are literally broadcasting your location to anyone with the right equipment.
And in 1965, the Syrians were struggling to find him. They knew there was a transmitter in the area because they were intercepting the signals, but their equipment was outdated, mostly leftovers from the post-World War II era. That changed when the Soviet Union stepped in.
Right. The Soviets provided the Syrian counterintelligence units with what were essentially mobile radio direction finding vans. These were the R-359 units, often called the Pelikan units. These weren't just vans, they were sophisticated mobile laboratories for the time.
Explain the Pelikan units to us. How did they actually work?
The way these worked was through triangulation. You have a van with a specialized antenna, usually a large loop or an array of dipoles on the roof, that can determine the direction or the bearing of a signal. If you have one van, you know the signal is somewhere along a line extending from your position. If you have two vans in different locations, where those two lines intersect is your target.
But there is a catch, right? Triangulation isn't instantaneous.
This is what we call the baseline problem in RDF. To get an accurate fix, the transmitter has to stay on the air long enough for the vans to move, take readings, and coordinate. In the 1960s, this was a manual process. You had to physically drive the van, rotate the antenna to find the null point where the signal was weakest or strongest, and then plot that on a paper map.
And this brings us to the fatal variable, time. Cohen was transmitting almost every day, often at the same time, and for relatively long durations. People often point to this as the tradecraft failure. They say he was too predictable. But Herman, when we look at the constraints he was under, did he actually have a choice?
That is the heart of the matter. We have talked about one-time pads before, specifically back in episode 943. A one-time pad, or OTP, is the only mathematically unbreakable encryption. It involves a pad of random letters that is used once and then destroyed, but it is incredibly labor-intensive.
Walk us through the process. If Cohen has a page of intelligence, say, the coordinates of a new Syrian artillery battery, what does he have to do to get that to Tel Aviv?
First, he has to translate his message into a numerical or letter-based code. Then, he has to take his physical one-time pad and perform modular addition for every single character in that message. If his report is 500 words long, he is sitting there for an hour just doing math by hand. Once it is encrypted, he then has to manually tap out that code in Morse.
So if he has a long report on Syrian troop movements in the Golan Heights, that could take 15, 20, or even 30 minutes to transmit.
And in the world of signals intelligence, or SIGINT, 30 minutes is an eternity. It is a lifetime. You have to imagine these Soviet advisors in Damascus. They were professionals. They realized that the noise of the city, the commercial radio stations, the military traffic, the police bands, was making it hard to find the needle. That was Cohen. So, they implemented a period of total radio silence in the city.
This is the part of the story that always gives me chills. They told everyone, from the military to the local police to the civilian broadcasters, to stop all radio transmissions at a specific time. They essentially turned off the lights in the entire city to see who was still holding a candle.
When the airwaves went silent, there was only one signal left, Cohen's. He was essentially shouting in a dark, quiet room. The Soviet vans didn't even have to work that hard at that point. They didn't need complex triangulation from across the city. They just followed the only sound they could hear right to his apartment building in the Abu Rumaneh district.
So it wasn't necessarily that he was careless with his timing, but that the sheer volume of information he was sending required him to be on the air for durations that the new Soviet technology could exploit. It was a race between the speed of his hands on the Morse key and the speed of those vans driving through the streets of Damascus.
And physics won. There is also the issue of the near-field effect. When those vans got close to his building, the signal became so strong that they didn't even need the directional antennas anymore. They could just use a handheld receiver to walk up the stairs and find the exact door.
It is a sobering thought. He was providing such high-quality intelligence that he likely felt the risk of the long transmission was justified by the value of the information. As a pro-Israel podcast, we have to recognize that his sacrifice likely saved thousands of lives in 1967. But from a purely technical standpoint, he was trapped by the bottleneck of manual encryption and Morse code.
It makes me think of what we discussed in episode 953 regarding number stations and those shadow signals. Even today, some agencies use these old methods because they are low-tech and don't leave a digital footprint in the way an internet connection does. But Cohen was the one talking back. And in espionage, the one who talks is the one who gets caught.
So let's pivot to the second part of the question. How does this play out in 2026? If we dropped a modern-day Eli Cohen into a hostile capital today, would he even be using radio? And if he did, how long would he last?
If he used manual Morse code today, he would be caught in seconds, not minutes. Seconds. The technology has moved from mechanical triangulation to what we call wideband persistent spectrum monitoring.
Explain that for us. Because I think people still have this image of a van with a spinning antenna on top. That feels very Cold War.
That image is totally obsolete. Today, you don't need a van to move around to find a signal. You have a distributed network of sensors. Think about every cell tower, every smart city sensor, every government building, and even some consumer electronics. Many of these can be outfitted with software-defined radios or SDRS.
For the non-nerds, what is an SDR?
An SDR is a radio where the components that were traditionally implemented in hardware like mixers, filters, and amplifiers are instead implemented by means of software on a personal computer or embedded system. This means one small device can scan the entire radio frequency spectrum from kilohertz to gigahertz in milliseconds.
So instead of a guy in a van turning a dial, searching for a frequency, you have a computer program that is constantly listening to everything at once.
And it is looking for anomalies. In a modern city like Damascus or Tehran, there is a massive amount of noise. You have cell signals, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, emergency services, and commercial broadcasts. A modern counterintelligence agency uses machine learning to establish a baseline of what normal looks like in the radio spectrum. The moment a new, unrecognized signal appears, even if it is just a tiny blip, the system flags it.
And because you have sensors all over the city, you don't need to triangulate by moving. You use something called time difference of arrival, or TDOA.
Right. TDOA is fascinating. Since radio waves travel at the speed of light, a signal will reach 3 different sensors at slightly different times. We're talking about nanoseconds of difference. By measuring those tiny differences in arrival time, a computer can calculate the exact point of origin with incredible precision. It can pinpoint which room in an apartment complex a signal is coming from before the operator has even finished their first sentence.
That is terrifying from an operational security perspective. It means the one-time bad bottleneck we talked about earlier is now a death sentence. If you stay on the air for more than a fraction of a second, you are visible.
This is why modern tradecraft has moved toward things like burst transmissions and low probability of intercept, or LPI waveforms. A burst transmission takes all that data, compresses it, and fires it off in a tiny fraction of a second. It looks like a blip of static to the human ear, and it is over before a traditional direction finder could even react.
But as we have discussed in previous episodes, like episode 895, even those bursts are becoming harder to hide. If the counterintelligence system is fast enough and has a high enough sampling rate, it can still catch that blip. This leads to the signal-to-noise trap. If you want to hide today, you can't just be quiet. You have to look like something else.
That is a great point, Korn. In Cohen's day, he was trying to hide by being the only signal on the air during a period of silence. Today, that would be suicide. Today, you hide by blending into the noise floor. You use spread spectrum technology where your signal is spread across a wide range of frequencies, making it look like low-level background noise or electronic interference. Unless you know exactly how to reconstruct that signal, you won't even know it is there.
It is a shift from hiding the content of the message to hiding the very existence of the transmitter. In the 1960s, everyone knew there was a radio signal. The challenge was finding out where it was coming from. In 2026, the challenge for the spy is making sure the enemy doesn't even know a transmission occurred.
And this is where the human element we talked about in episode 895 comes back into play. Even with the best technology, if you are an operative in a hostile city, you are carrying a device. That device has a physical signature. It has an electronic fingerprint. Modern SIG-INT can detect the unintentional emissions from your laptop or your specialized radio gear. Even if you aren't transmitting, the oscillators inside your electronics are leaking tiny amounts of RF energy.
This is what people call tempest, or compromising emanations. It means that just having your gear turned on could be enough to give you away to a sensitive enough sensor network.
So, if Eli Cohen were in Damascus today, he wouldn't be using a Morse key. He would likely be using highly encrypted short-range bursts to a satellite or a localized dead drop. Or, more likely, he would be using the infrastructure that is already there. Why build your own radio station when you can hide your data inside a standard encrypted VPN tunnel coming out of a coffee shop?
But even then, you run into traffic analysis. The Syrian or Iranian authorities might not be able to read the encrypted data, but they can see that user X is connecting to a specific server at the same time every day. They see the metadata. And as we always say, metadata kills.
It really does. Looking back at Cohen, I think we have to conclude that he was a victim of a technological inflection point. He was using 1950s tradecraft against 1960s Soviet technology. He was a master of the human side of espionage, the HUMINT, but he was eventually defeated by the physics of the radio spectrum.
It is interesting to think about the political context, too. Being a pro-Israel, conservative show, we look at Cohen as a hero because his intelligence was so vital for the survival of the state. He found the hidden Syrian gun emplacements on the Golan Heights by suggesting they plant eucalyptus trees to give the soldiers shade. Those trees became the targets for the Israeli Air Force later on. That is brilliant human intelligence. But it is a reminder that even the best human can be undone by a failure in SIGINT or OPSEC.
And that is the lesson for today. We have much better encryption now. Our phones use AES-256, which is effectively unbreakable by any current computer. But our location, our physical presence, we are more visible than ever. Every time your phone pings a tower, you are doing exactly what Eli Cohen did, just at a different frequency.
That leads perfectly into the practical takeaway for our listeners. Most people think privacy means encryption. They think if they use an encrypted messaging app, they are safe. But the lesson of Eli Cohen is that the signal itself is a beacon. If you are interested in your own privacy, you need to understand your RF footprint.
I totally agree. One thing I would suggest to our more technically minded listeners is to get a cheap software-defined radio dongle. You can find them for $20 or $30. Plug it into your computer and just look at the spectrum around your house. You will be shocked at how much noise your smart fridge, your light bulbs, and your phone are putting out. Each one of those is a signal that can be tracked and identified.
It is about moving from hiding content to hiding presence. If you are using a device that is constantly shouting, "I am here," to the network, the encryption on your messages doesn't matter if someone wants to find your physical location.
And in a conflict zone, or even in a high-stakes corporate environment, that physical location is the most sensitive piece of data you have.
You know, we have covered a lot of this ground in different ways over the last few hundred episodes. I am thinking about episode 79 where we talked about the cost of a click and how civilian bystanders unknowingly become intelligence assets just by having their phones on in a war zone. It is the same principle as Cohen, just scaled up to the entire population.
It really is. Everyone is a sensor and everyone is a transmitter now. The radio silence the Soviets used to catch Cohen is impossible today because the world never stops talking. But that actually makes the counterintelligence job easier in some ways because they have so much more data to feed into their machine learning models. They don't need silence, they just need a pattern.
So, to answer the original question from the prompt, was Cohen careless? I would say no. He was a professional operating at the limit of what was possible. He was caught because his mission required more bandwidth, in the literal and figurative sense, than the environment could safely provide once the Soviets introduced mobile direction finding.
I think that is a fair assessment. He wasn't careless, he was overextended, and the technology of the time had a very specific detection threshold that he was forced to cross to get the job done. He was a man out of time using the tools of the past against the technology of the future.
It makes me wonder what we are doing today that will look just as obvious to people 60 years from now. We think we are being so clever with our VPN, and our encrypted apps, but there is likely some physical or mathematical variable we are ignoring that will make our current tradecraft look primitive.
Maybe it is our power consumption patterns, or the way our heart rate is tracked by our smartwatches, or even the way we type. There are already studies showing you can identify a person just by the rhythm of their keystrokes. We are always leaving a trail. The goal is just to make that trail as faint as possible.
It is the ultimate game of cat and mouse. And as we have seen in recent geopolitical developments here in 2026, the stakes haven't gotten any lower. If anything, the Eli Cohen scenario is happening every single day now, just in the digital realm.
Instead of a van on a street in Damascus, it is a server in an air-conditioned building in a desert, crunching terabytes of metadata to find the one person who doesn't fit the pattern.
Well, this has been a deep dive. I think it is important to remember the human stories behind these technical failures. Cohen wasn't just a transmitter. He was a man who left behind a family and a legacy that is still felt here in Israel every day.
And if you want to learn more about the technical side of how we got here, I really recommend going back and listening to episode 553 on the SITREP method for AI-powered intelligence. It gives you a good sense of how that noise is processed today.
And of course, check out the website at myweirdprompts.com. We have the full archive there, including all the episodes we mentioned today, like 779 and 895. You can search by topic if you want to fall down the rabbit hole of signals intelligence or espionage history.
And hey, if you are enjoying these deep dives, please take a second to leave us a review on Spotify or whatever podcast app you are using. It actually helps a lot with the algorithms and helps other people find the show. We really appreciate the support from our regular listeners.
Yeah, it keeps us going. We live in a world where everyone is trying to capture your attention, so the fact that you spend 30 minutes with us means a lot.
Alright, I think that wraps it up for today. The physics of the signal, the bottleneck of the pad, and the tragedy of the perfect spy.
Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. We will be back next time with another deep dive into the strange, the technical, and the overlooked.
Until then, watch your signal-to-noise ratio.
Stay safe out there. Bye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts.